Yep. Welcome back to our Environment and Integrated Catchments Committee meeting. To get us started, could I please hand the raka over to Matua Roger to open us with a karakia.
Tēnā tātou te komiti whakaoro ngā whenua ngā moana o ngā tāngata. Ngā mihi I roto kaupapa o te wā. Ki roi tātou, hei tīmata tātou kui. Whakatakata hau ki te uru, whakatakata hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina ki uta, kia wātata ki tāra. E ia ki ane, kia tāpura, he tio, he uka, he hauhu, ti hei kōrero. Kia ora tātou.
Tēnā koe matua. Next on the agenda item are notices. Do we have any notices? Fine, no notices. Any apologies?
Madam Chair, an apology for an early departure at 12 for half an hour.
Thank you. Councillor Curtin.
Can you make that 11?
And up here.
Get whacked around the ears.
Can we please have a mover for apologies?
So moved.
Thank you, Councillor Van Beek.
I'll
And
second.
seconder, thank you, Councillor Barker. All in agreement, say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Thank you. Do we have any conflicts of interest in today's items? Carl. Thank you. Confirmation of the 3rd of February minutes. Are there any corrections to be made from those minutes? As there are none, can I please have a mover? Councillor Van Beek, a seconder. Councillor Foss. All those in agreement say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Ka pai. Call for minor items. Follow-ups. I might step back. Follow-ups from the previous meeting on page 3.
Chair will take those as read. Happy to take any questions.
No questions from the follow-ups?
I'll move they be received.
Thank you, Councillor Barker. Seconded by Councillor Van Beek. All in agreement, say aye.
Aye.
Those against, kia ora, carried. And call for minor items on the agenda. Yes, Councillor Foss.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to talk a little bit about the karamu.
Karamu. Any other minor items? Kapai, thank you very much. So we now move into decision items.
Just before we go, could I just,
Yes.
I meant to raise a point on the, when we've got this letter signed by Tom Skirman, it's very hard to read on Stella.
Right.
So could I just ask the staff that before when they upload it, to check how legible it is, and if it's not legible, to put it on another format. I spent ages trying to figure my way through this. I always read stuff from Tom, but it's just really poor quality, so I don't know what you can do about it. I don't know why it's like that.
Yep. So look, apologies, Councillor. I had the same frustration and was going to raise it offline with the team. The issue relates actually to Info Council, which creates the documents rather than Stella itself. And it's the reason why with the major reports that we also upload a separate copy as we have today for the Possum Control Area review. And I just would like the team to ensure that when they finalise each and every agenda, they just check that there aren't any items embedded that could be, that also need to be separately uploaded, because this one, had it been done so, it would have been clear. So
That's right. So
understood, we'll get that right.
because if the information is given to us, but it's illegible, unreadable, well, there's no point. Send it to us in Swahili. I'll go learn that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, very good point, Councillor Barker. Thank you. Back onto item 6. Ian, could you please introduce this item?
Sure. Kia ora tātou, Morena Committee. Look, I'll just get Mark Mitchell and Kevin Collins to come up and join us at the table. I think you will recall both these gentlemen who spoke to you about our Section 17A review of our biosecurity biodiversity functions last year. Mark is the Acting Manager Catchment Services, which includes our biodiversity and biosecurity functions, and Kevin is a consultant based in Waikato who has been working with Mark on both the Section 17A review and then the subsequent detailed review of our Possum Control Area program. So the paper that sits in front of you combines two things. One is a summary of Kevin's report, and he's going to speak to that shortly, and then a staff view on that and our recommended approach to responding to that review. And Mark will talk through the response and what we would like to do, what we're proposing to do. I'd just really stress that today is really, for me, an opportunity to gauge your appetite for this particular piece of work, and our proposal for us to pursue the course of action we want to pursue will require some additional resourcing that I can find within my existing budgets, but it's going to require a bit of reorganisation. I don't want to do that if there is not a lot of appetite for us to dig deep into this topic and bring you back the supporting documents and information you'll need for further decision making on the proposed changes we would like to make to our possum management program in the region. So today is not although it is a decision item, it's not the last opportunity you'll have to influence this. You'll see from the attached timeline that Mark will talk to, there are a number of exit ramps, a number of check-in points for you to receive information, review it, and then make further decisions. But today is really an opportunity for you to understand what we've done and what we've learnt, and therefore what we're advising and what we would like to do, and for you to either affirm that direction of travel or to suggest that it doesn't occur, or some other alternative, before we go too much further and spend any more time or money on the topic. So look, I'll hand over to, I think Kevin's going to lead off with his details on his report, and then Mark will cover off the staff response, and then we'll take questions.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's nice to be here again. I did try to bring some rain from the Waikato a little bit. We try to be helpful. I will be intentionally brief. Ian's done a good job of setting it up, and I want to leave enough time for questions and comments, and you've all received the report. So I'll just highlight the things that I thought.
Excuse me, Madam Chair. Colin, would you mind just introducing us? I know you've been previously, but we're failing memory most around the table.
It's getting old.
Absolutely.
Thank you,
Are
Kevin.
you living at 10
That'd be
o'clock?
great.
I'll be home by 3.
Yes, so my name's Kevin Collins. I'm based in Hamilton in the Waikato. I am a consultant on biosecurity and biodiversity issues. And among other things, I ran what Waikato Regional Council called its natural heritage programs for a number of years, until about 2015, I guess, and then went out on my own.
And were you involved in the 17A review?
Same person.
Same person.
Okay.
Yep. So, so this is really a follow-on from that. So the review that I did before was a broad overview of a lot of council biosecurity functions. One of the recommendations or outcomes from that report was to focus down on the possum program, and that's what this is. And that's what that says. So I looked at the Hawke's Bay model. I looked at models used by other councils and other agencies. I talked to council staff, obviously, contractors. I talked to other council biosecurity staff, and basically analyzed all that information to come to some conclusions. The findings from last year, just to remind you all, were that within that Section 17A analysis, the possum program scored reasonably low, so 49 out of 100, that was the scale we used, and that was the feedback from the community, that it was not tremendously efficient. And a number of comments, those kind of open-ended comments in the survey, it was clear that people thought the program was slipping a little bit. I think that was actually a word that was used quite a lot, that we've slipped a little bit. The other thing we found was that the possum budget for Hawke's Bay is low. It's considerably lower than other similar councils. And so, as I said, the review of the PCA model was undertaken. Just to give you the big picture, to recap how the Possum Control Program works here, The fundamental part of the program is what we call landowner responsibility, or land occupiers. So occupiers are responsible for controlling possums on their land, either by doing it themselves or by hiring a contractor. So that's a regulatory requirement. It's written into the RPMP. It's a rule. And the figure that's in the rule is 4% residual trapped catch. That rule applies with various subsidies and exemptions that I'm going to talk about later. And geographically, it applies to 88 PCAs, Possum Control Areas, 4,300 properties, and it's a reasonably big area. It's close to 700,000 hectares. So that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about urban Hawke's Bay. My findings are reasonably straightforward. What I find is that the landowner responsibility model has intrinsic complexities and difficulties associated with it. It is intrinsically more difficult than other models to manage, to monitor, and to be certain of results. And that certainty issue is something that I'm going to return to. So that's the model itself. In the Hawke's Bay program specifically, I find inadequate monitoring. I find, in my view, too many exemptions and subsidies, and that the full cost of the program is poorly understood across the community. So there, as we'll talk about this again later, but there's quite a number of pieces in this system, and it's difficult to add them all up. I guess I want to be clear that this is not news to Hawke's Bay staff, that they're well aware of these kind of limitations of the program, and they've developed these systems to accommodate that and to try to make the best of it that they can. For example, one of the things they do is they strongly encourage landowners to use contractors because they're well aware that it's more efficient, more effective, and simply easier to manage. Just going to pause for a sip.
Madam Chair, questions afterwards?
Yes, please.
So I'm going to look at those components individually, and I'll start with the landowner responsibility approach. The core challenge for landowner responsibility is that it puts another job back onto landowners who are already busy, and it becomes just one of many jobs on the farm. So for some landowners, it won't be a priority, possum control. For some landowners, it will be a priority, but they just get busy. Other stuff happens in their lives. And some of them lack the skills. So when I was doing this report, I thought of myself. I do my own possum control on my batch. It's just something I do. It's not a rule. And I find that some weeks I do it reliably, and some weeks I don't. I get distracted. Hawke's Bay staff have done a little bit of analysis of people who say they're doing their own possum control. And after you crunch the numbers, it looks like something like 50% of those people are not doing control, or they're doing it poorly and sporadically. Another aspect of the landowner responsibility model is that it requires, because it's a compliance issue, it requires staff to monitor many individual properties. I monitor your property to see if you're complying. I monitor your property to see if you're complying, rather than monitoring possum numbers over a big area to look at outcomes. Are the outcomes being achieved? It's a different concept, and it is more complex. And so the end result is uncertainty in the system. Monitoring. Monitoring here at Hawke's Bay varies year by year depending on the budget. There's a target of roughly 10% properties per year. That does vary. In 2017, for example, the numbers say it was just 5%. So that's low compared to other councils. Other councils are in the 20, 25, up to 40% annually. You can imagine that 10% per year means if you're a landowner, you have once in 10 years you might get monitored. That's a low threshold for sort of reinforcing the need to do possum control. There are some technical issues associated with monitoring. So large properties, because of the way the system works, it's easier for them to pass a monitor, an individual monitor, even if they have areas of really high possum numbers, because there's an average process, and so they can pass. Ironically, at the other end of the scale, really small properties, they're not easy to monitor at all because of the way the protocols work, even though they also can harbor quite large possum populations because they have good habitat. There's no systematic monitoring program here to really focus on the areas of prime possum habitat. So the result is that you can miss hotspots. And so I heard that a lot from both staff and contractors. People would say, we go into an area, we think the possum numbers are low, and boom, we find a hotspot, and that hotspot is spreading possums out throughout the area. There's also a buffer for forestry, so they don't have the same rules. They have a rule that says they have to manage possums in a 500-meter buffer. That's challenging to monitor, because you would have to monitor it constantly, really, to see how effective it is. So the end result there, again, is uncertainty in the system. There are exemptions in the system that I believe make it more complex. So forestry and those small properties are exempt to some degree. But as I said, they can be serious exacerbators of the problem. So forestry, for example, has to meet a 5% RTC, not 4, and only in that 500-meter buffer. So when I was doing my research, I went back and I looked at some of the submissions you all received on the pest management plan when it was in draft form, and Federated Farmers pointed out that it's very easy for possums to move more than 500 meters in a night. So even if that buffer was clear today, tomorrow it might not be clear. Possums move around a lot. Forestry also receives a rates discount. So others are paying 205 cents per hectare. They're paying 74 cents. And the rate take on forestry is capped, in my view, arbitrarily at 5.5% of the total rates revenue. So those are things that merit a further look, in my opinion. And small properties are exempt. So the end result of all of those is greater uncertainty. It's starting to pile up, in my view, that uncertainty in the system. There are a couple of subsidies in the system here. Council will pay 40% of a landowner's bait cost if they're doing their own control, or if they hire a contractor, the council will pay anything above $2 per hectare. And over the last 5 years, that's starting to approach $300,000. So that, in my view, transfers those regulatory compliance costs, just transfers them over to other people. Somebody has to pay that, and that gets transferred over to other ratepayers in a not particularly transparent sort of way. And in my view, it's not the most effective way to achieve the objectives that Council is trying to get out of the Possum Control Program. I wasn't tasked with looking at a detailed cost analysis of all the different options. Nevertheless, you can't do this kind of analysis with having some sense of where the costs lie. What I'll say is that it's a complex calculation, particularly because of those things that I just put on the table. So you have to add, if you want a full sense of what the system costs to the community, you have to add a lot of things into that. For example, the time spent filling bait stations is an opportunity cost. People could be doing something other than that. So I did make an estimate of that, and my estimate is that across the system, possum control is costing the community somewhere between $4 and $8 per hectare under the current model. And you can see that's a pretty big range, and that's because there's a lot of complexity and uncertainty in the system. I also went and talked to contractors, and what the staff did was they provided a real-life example of a place where landscape scale contract control over multiple years could be done. I think that the area was 87,000 hectares. It was a big area, and it was a real place. So it had a lot of specificity to it. And so then contractors were able to come back with their estimates of cost, and the average there was $7 to $8 per hectare. And you can see that's a much smaller range just because there's less complexity in the equation that we were trying to do. I do want to emphasize that cost of uncertainty. I know I've been using the word a lot, but that uncertainty is really difficult to quantify in a dollar term, but it is, in my opinion, very important. The more uncertainty there is in the system, the more difficult it is to know if money is being well spent and if those outcomes are being achieved. And so to that degree, those uncertainties would be greatly reduced or absent if a different model was used. On the funding side, over the whole system, looking at the whole biosecurity spend for the council, what we found last year was that Hawke's Bay's expenditure is low compared to similar councils, roughly half. So 6% of total operating expenditure for this council, 11 for neighboring relevant councils, so roughly half. And by coincidence, the Possum Control spending is also about half of your neighboring councils, so low in comparison. The animal pest control rate that funds some of that possum control work, but not all of it, is struck on land area, and it's only on rural properties, and only those rural properties greater than 4 hectares. Other councils do it differently. They base their rating structure on capital value, looking more at the region-wide public good that's happening. I note that because one of the recommendations is to have a second look at the funding structure here, and that's what I say there. A review would give you the opportunity to look at those options: capital value, land area, rural versus area, urban. For example, who benefits from the biodiversity benefits, the biodiversity gains that occur because of possum control. And that brings me to just wrap up with the recommendations, which is, my recommendation is a contractor-based model would be more efficient and more effective for you. I do think you should re-examine the rating system, just so you have a chance to figure out where benefits and exacerbators are falling and how those are being addressed. That contractor model, in my view, is more efficient. You have a greater certainty of outcomes. It's more equitable, so I didn't use the word earlier, but there's a fair amount of free riding going on in the system. People are not doing, in these possum control areas, people are not doing possum control, their neighbors are, and they're benefiting from that. So it's a more equitable system. The staff here, because it's an individual compliance model, the staff has to have an enforcement process hidden away in their back pocket, not used very much. You don't need that if you're using contractors because it's all performance-based. I said last year, and I'll repeat again, the way the Biosecurity Act works is it's up to this council to decide what's right for its community here. So operational efficiency is only one consideration. Landowner responsibility might be the right model to continue with here. But I guess from my perspective, it's important that everybody be aware of the trade-offs. And so what Ian's put on the table is develop a proposal and have community consultation around that proposal as an essential first step. Parking that for a moment, you could make the landowner responsibility model more efficient. There are things you could do. Forestry, for example, you could bring them in. You could develop methods for monitoring smaller properties. All councils struggle with that, but there's work that could be done there. There are some technical things to address those issues of large properties passing more easily. The subsidies for the bait and the use of contractors, I think, should be reviewed. More engagement with landowners, spend some more money, increase the monitoring, aim for 25%, for example. Those are all good steps, and they would all achieve something, but those core issues with why landowner responsibility is challenging, those will remain. And then kind of regardless of the operational model, it was unclear to me that those forestry exemptions are warranted. I do think that the monitoring program should really focus on understanding what's happening on those high possum density areas with good habitat. Biodiversity monitoring, you've probably heard presentations on this before, but you'll be getting a lot of good biodiversity outcomes from this program. So your RTC is 4%. That's a good low number. That'll be giving you some really good biodiversity outcomes. If you were at 10 or 12%, the biodiversity outcomes would be much less valuable. But as far as I'm aware, you're not monitoring biodiversity. And so the good stuff that's happening out there, A, we don't know about it, and B, you're not getting credit for it. And I think that's something that you should look at more closely. And then this is in the report. I haven't talked about it yet, but many of us probably use Brodifacoum for possum control. I do. It's effective, it's cheap, and it's easily available. That's not going to be the case in the near future. So the government is reviewing how to use Brodifacoum because of its environmental effects and toxicity. And it's very likely that there will be purchase limits and possibly the need for a controlled substance license. And that will make all of us, myself included, much less likely to use Brodifacoum and will be more likely to just go, I'm just going to let it go. So councils are submitting on this. I know you guys were working on it, but But the direction of travel is clear. Access to birdificum is going to be more limited, and that's going to be an issue, particularly for this model. It's not an issue so much for contractors, because they can use cyanide and other things. But landowners who don't have a controlled substance license are really going to struggle. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Councillors, members, do we have questions? Martin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Kevin. That's a very clear, well-structured report and case that you put to us for a change to the model, and I just wanted to test out a couple of the ideas in it. One is the shift to a capital, or the suggestion of a capital rating structure. I understand the logic being to regionalise the benefits and cost burden, but you could equally do that with a land-based rating structure. It wouldn't necessarily need to be capital to achieve that.
No, it wouldn't necessarily need to be capital value. I guess the discussion would be around we all know that the ratings, local government rating is challenging, but what best links the benefits to the people who are paying those bills? And so if it's something like biodiversity, and I'm now going back to Waikato where I used to work because they're on capital value. For something like biodiversity, property size probably doesn't matter so much. If what you really care about is restoration of native birds, for example, whether you have a 50-hectare property or a 5-hectare property probably doesn't matter much. And capital value is a different approach.
Equally, I just thought you might club with the old lady who lives in a house in Havelock North, or the building owner in CBD in Napier, who hasn't got a great link.
You would, and it's obviously really hard to make a direct connection. It's really all about what benefits do people want in the community, and if that little old lady is a member of Forest and Bird and she's gung-ho for biodiversity.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yep.
All right, now the other thing is just, you said it would be more cost efficient to move to a contractor model. I'm wondering whether in fact it's more cost effective rather than cost efficient, because it's an approximate doubling of cost, but you're from an outcomes perspective achieving more, isn't it? Is it more about cost effectiveness than cost efficiency?
Yeah, yes. I guess it depends on how you look at it. Yes, there is that. It is a way to deliver services, in my view, more efficiently or effectively. I'm going to flick to a slide in a minute that maybe will help, because I thought a lot about this as I put the presentation together, and I thought about how to present this. So, I could paint my house, and I maybe could do a reasonably good job, but I got to make do. I don't have the right equipment. I have to do it this way. Maybe I can only do it one day a week. My health and safety stuff is a little bit dodgy, or contractors. So honestly, I think you get both. I think you get more efficiency because this is their business, and I think you get more effective outcomes. And the effectiveness is around how random is the control that's being done. So under the landowner responsibility model, we know with quite a high level of confidence that it's reasonably random. With contractors, you have a high degree of ability to manage their effectiveness.
Yeah.
Councillor, perhaps if I could just add to one other really important bit, is if you're looking at this at a landscape scale spatially, it gives you the opportunity to be far more sophisticated about where you would target your work and your activity. So I think Kevin made the point that no one size fits all in terms of habitat, so there are hot spots. So we can then start to focus on the areas where the highest risk might occur for possum numbers. So it gives you that ability to be sophisticated that the landowner model doesn't.
Just one last question I had, and it's from feedback from a constituent that I spoke to about this issue, and who in fact raised it with me, and the attitude was, well, look, just enforce it. No excuses. Farmer has to do it. And we've got in front of us, and believe me, I'm not attacking the logic or the argument at all, a model that assumes that model, just that landowner responsibility can't work for the lack of ability to monitor and the lack of compliance. What would it cost? Or, is it feasible? Because we're going to have to bring the monitoring under your recommendation, monitoring cost up quite a lot anyway to do that stratified monitoring, whatever it is. To increase monitoring and enforcement, to achieve the same sort of bang for the buck. Given that we're looking at a cost increase for a contractor model, if you kept it where the responsibility where it is, the counterfactual is just increased monitoring and enforcement, would you achieve the same?
I don't believe you'd achieve the same bang for buck. I think it would cost more, and it would be more complex and more controversial in the community. So Taranaki has the landowner responsibility model, and this model is in fact based quite a bit on Taranaki. They issue, he told me, somewhere around 30 or 40 notices of direction. Those are enforcement orders every year. I'm not aware that you do any notices of direction.
No, so we follow up with compliance, but we generally get the land occupier over the line before having to use the Biosecurity Act on them. So we get the same result, but we're not using the Biosecurity Act. But equally, I think our RTC results are slightly better than Taranaki as
They're
well.
considerably better. Taranaki's target is 10% RTC. Yeah. So yes, you could significantly ramp up enforcement. I believe that would come with costs, both financial and sort of community enthusiasm.
Thank you. You've answered precisely what I needed to know.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Foss.
Thanks. Just first, can I just make just a minor point that the caricature of the little old lady in Havelock North, just be careful where we go there. I know many of them, and actually, I don't care if that person may or may not be a member of Forest and Bird. They're a person of Hawke's Bay. They're a ratepayer. They may have lived here a long, long time and have a large family, and by and large treasure the environment, regardless if they're little, big, old, young, male or female. Just because it does pop up quite a bit, that kind of anyway, thanks so much for the report and that continuation of kind of an honest reflection of where things have got to as this rests on the 17A. That's really good. Really appreciate that, and your presentation there, part 2, and cutting to the chase, by and large, recommendations as put together by staff and yourselves look really, really good. Speaking with those on the ground who are filling the traps, the contractors, people on the ground know, and they know stuff that doesn't necessarily get to this table or the next levels or 2 down. So it's invaluable talking to them, and that's reflected in your report. Thanks so much. Just a couple of things I wondered. I mean, the origins of this model come from biosecurity, from the TB lens, from the vector control for that. And then you touched on it towards the end there. You said biodiversity versus biosecurity. And so this gives us the opportunity to join the dots, because we look at an urban rate in some way, shape or form. Well, they tend to have less knowledge or interest in things TB say, but they treasure the kiruru in the back garden or the tui or whatever. And so this opportunity here to look at this through an environmental lens as well, I think is the big opportunity. So again, thanks for bringing that up. And your point about hotspots versus averages, absolutely right. I have been on the wrong end of all of this. And so it's great to see the machine working and putting things right. We can't undo stuff. Just one thing, maybe it's for another day. Did I read the slide there correctly? Forestry is rated, there's a cap on all forestry rating at 5.5% of total rate. Or is it just pertaining to possums?
It's that animal pest targeted rate.
Okay, so it's just as far as this
It's 5%.
subset's concerned.
Yeah.
Okay, great for clarifying that, because I think we tend to agree user pays, abuser pays, beneficiary pays. So through great lens. So absolutely, I think we should have a look down that line as per your recommendations as well. Can I ask a question? Do the farm management plans, do they include pest control, this kind of stuff?
No. So Councillor, no, they don't. Simply because it's not written into the schedule for farm plans for the tuki where they're required. However, that said, the current Minister of Agriculture, and I fully endorse his ambition around what he calls an integrated farm plan, would see biosecurity as well as a range of other things brought into farm planning. So the future, in my view, and I think supported by the current minister, would be, yep, absolutely all that stuff comes in, and ultimately the farm plan talks to biosecurity as well as biodiversity outcomes for the farm.
Yeah.
And just the other point, perhaps while I'm thinking about it, just I think it's really important we understand, and I think the value of the further review will reveal it, as what are our objectives with this program, because we are not the TB vector manager. You're going to hear from Osprey later this morning. They are the TB vector manager. However, there is absolutely an indirect benefit from this program on minimising the risk of TB in farming landscapes. But getting to, I think it's going to be helpful for this table to get to clarity and certainty around what are your objectives with this program. What do you want to see achieved? The outcomes you expect, so that we can then go away and manage to that and report back, monitor and report back on those outcomes. Because at the moment it's a little bit hazy. There's a view in the community that we run the PCA program to protect farm landscapes from TB.
Yeah.
Well, that's not the case. We do it because we're trying to secure biodiversity outcomes, and the TB vector manager, they're responsible for TB management.
Yeah.
The fact is we work together, and there are indirect benefits for both of our programs on each other, but creating that certainty for the community, I think, would be really valuable.
Yeah, no, thanks, Ian. That's a good point.
I'll just stop you there. Committee members, can I remind you not to embellish too much on prelude and just focus on the questions so that our guests can answer them. That's what he's there for.
So the final question then
Final question.
is, if Osprey complete whatever they're doing in a particular area and it gets down to under the TB job, fine, but then it gets handed back to us and it falls into yourself. So that ability to join the dots and constantly look through it through both lenses is very, very important. As a question, is that important?
Absolutely it is, and that's why I think the value of you hearing from Osprey this morning will reinforce that we are both aligned to that combined and collaborative value of our work, and we are working actively to ensure that those overlaps are managed well.
Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Lambert, question, thank you.
Yeah, just one reference the Osprey in that too, because obviously the farmers, if they've got TB in the controlled movement area, then their income is down. So there is a relationship. Is it the regional council's responsibility to monitor possum control, or is it just Osprey's?
So we have a monitoring program associated with our current PCA program, so that's monitoring possum numbers across those areas. But as Kevin's pointed out, it's not a particularly effective monitoring program. It's small in terms of the number of properties monitored every year, so 10%. So in theory, a property is only visited once every 10 years. A lot can happen with possum numbers in 10 years. Our monitoring program, as it currently exists, if we were to continue with the existing model of possum control, would need to change.
Yeah, and like, do you actually monitor on like a buffer control basis rather than obviously on the coast but inland?
Yeah, so we monitor throughout the PCA program, whether it's on the coast or inland, but our area is distinct from Osprey, so we don't go into Osprey's vector management area and manage or monitor how they're doing with their possum management. It's completely up to them to manage. So that's the distinction. We're not going into anywhere that's been infected with TB. That's completely under Osprey management. So we just monitor within our Possum Control Area program.
Okay, so just so I can understand the difference between Osprey and PCA, so are they rated, costed out separately, or do they get funding separately?
Yeah, it's a levy payment. So they're levy funded by industry bodies, and you'll see in the Osprey paper that's following, there's some detail of how they're funded. So their funding comes from a different source.
Thank you, Councillor Barker.
Two questions. If we went to this contractor model run by the council, would we be able to bolt on other programs such as mustard control and other pest control to it?
Look, I think the answer is all of that becomes possible. I guess my reflection would be that we are probably to some extent in the position we are at the moment because we've tried to crowd too much into one space and not done it all particularly well. So moving into a contractor model, I would be wanting to really focus on the possum management as the primary objective. If we can structure the program in a manner such that predator control became a possibility we would look at that. There's obviously additional cost associated with that that would have to be met by somebody. So I guess it's a qualified maybe, because I just wouldn't want to lose sight of the primacy of the possum management. We're here today talking to you about a problem we've got with possum management. I really want to get that resolved and working well before we got too clever and sophisticated and ended up tripping ourselves up in terms of achieving the primary objective.
Well, a qualified maybe is a new thought to me, but I'll just come back to, if I may probe this a bit more. I'm surprised you haven't thought about this. There are now sophisticated traps which will also do possums and mustelids. Why wouldn't we try to use both of those at the same time rather than just focus simply on possums, is one way of doing it. I mean, surely we must be able to make much out of this.
So look, I'll let Mark talk to that, but I mean, my initial response would be you've got completely different lures. I mean, possums, you lure predators with different baits than you will with possums. So
Surrender.
I'm not sure whether you can get one trap to kill all. I love the concept. I'm not sure whether it's
I surrender on
practical.
that. I'll move to my second question. So is that what with this program is outlined is we would take areas, and I think you've talked about having 4 hectares or less out of it. So we'd set areas that we're going to take control of as the contractor model. Would it be possible to get areas, would it be possible for areas or groups of people to say, we would like to opt into this to be part of the contractor model and not have responsibility of doing it ourselves?
Yeah, so I can answer to that.
Yeah. Oh, good.
Properties greater than 4 hectares, we can actually undertake enforcement action. Less than 4 hectares we can't. With a contractor model, that's no longer an issue. So there's no reason we would need to exclude properties smaller than 4 hectares. Okay. So if we wanted to, we could absolutely include urban areas as part of our broader Possum Control Area program, including them in that.
This is making it much more attractive.
So that would be something we would look to include in cost.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Curtin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll do my best not to preamble.
Thank you.
But I'm just interested in the little old lady from Havelock North.
You've started already.
It's getting close to
You've started already. He says he's not, then he's going.
No, he did. Totally conflicted.
She's still
control over that side of the table.
She's still subsidising Napier.
Yes, Napier paying all the way. I just wanted to do a couple of questions. First of all, thank you, Kevin. I do have an offline question for you in terms of research in the Waikato, but 284,000 in the last 5 years, is that 284,000 a year or cumulative?
No, cumulative across the full 5 years.
Okay, and can you tell me if that's, staff may know this, general funded or targeted rate, or where does the money come from for that?
What costs are we referring to?
This is the top up above the $2 per hectare.
Oh, yeah, so that is 75%.
75-25?
Yes, yeah.
Targeted?
Targeted.
General. Okay. And is that the sum total of all our spend in monitoring, subsidising the PCA? No? Are those figures available?
They are, but we don't have them here with us.
Okay, that's fine.
Yep, so we can
It's
provide
the point I want to make, actually. The other question I've got up for you is at paragraph 10 of your paper, 70 million invested directly by council over the 20 years. Is that targeted rate, general rate? What's the breakdown?
I'd say it's that same breakdown again.
Okay.
I believe that's always been...
Sure. Okay. In terms of the progression of this paper, can we actually have a little bit of analysis of the costs, etc., that council has actually invested and where the money's coming from for that period of time? Supplementary, Madam Chair, Osprey gather the money in from the application of its source, I understand, from killing stock. So they're responsible for vector control. Do they contribute to the council's revenue for our PCA? No. Right. So they're responsible for vector control. We do the monitoring.
We do the monitoring in our programs that are not part of our Osprey-run program.
Okay.
They do monitoring in their own programs, in their own program areas. So they're distinct. And this is I guess this is the value of the enhanced relationship with Osprey, because, I mean, logic would dictate that actually that doesn't make sense, that there's a bright line we don't cross. In reality, that's not the case.
Sure, okay. Why I'm raising this, if you don't mind, Madam Chair, is that having been around the table in 2001, when we did PCA, introduce them, and again in 2013 when I was a strong advocate of of landowner responsibility, it's troubling to have arrived at this point where clearly that is slipping. A euphemism for something else, I would suggest. So I'm really encouraging my fellow councillors to really understand where the money's coming from and should we be in this. And by that I mean, are we the monitor or are we funding vector control before we make that decision? And then the other aspect of this, and that's 14.4 of the paper, we do not have a robust biodiversity monitoring system in play. So the proposition is that we have this value to the community, one, economically, that's never been shown, and two, biodiversity, and we can't show that either. So we have no value proposition to put before the little old lady from Havelock North at all.
Hey, leave the little old lady alone. No more.
Is that it, Councillor Kevin?
Well, the question is, are we going to get the detail?
Yes.
So that this council can make an informed decision about its engagement?
Absolutely, and perhaps just really quickly, Mark could bring up, I don't know, does it follow directly this?
Yeah,
but there's a timeline
Four slides.
that Mark could talk to. Might just
Is that for the next item?
No, it's for this
It's
item.
just wrapping this up.
Just while he's getting up, I think the point you alluded to earlier, Ian, is that to get the information to make particularly well-evidenced and informed decision for the next steps, including evaluation of the status quo, is going to take some investment, and it hasn't been part of the budget program to date. And so Ian is proposing, should you agree today, to reprioritise some funding out of our biodiversity work to fund that, so that you, in time for the annual plan next year, can make a really informed decision.
Exactly.
And when we say biodiversity work, it's our predator-free program, so we've got a pot of money there that we would take some out of, so we will do less predator-free work to get you the answers you need to make informed decisions on it. Our advice is that is required.
Is that sufficient for now, Councillor?
There is a timeline that Mark, perhaps Mark, just, so the timeline there, which I think is also in your paper, sets out.
It's all read this.
You've all read it? So it sets out the process and the decision points. So the CBA that you'll get will dig into all of the issues and questions that you're raising. And I think, like I say, I go back to the thing that we need to get absolute clarity on is why are we doing this work? Because we're not the vector manager for TB. So let's be really clear about this program and what it's trying to achieve. Let's ensure that we're robustly monitoring, not only investing in the program, but monitoring to ensure that outcomes are being achieved or not. And if not, we need to re-engage the management and change what we're doing.
Thank you, Ian. Councillor Graham, question.
Mark, what's wrong with the existing poison? You mentioned the government are going to ban it, or protocol?
So brodifacoum is widely used. It's a second generation anticoagulant. It can bioaccumulate, so a possum dies, something scavenges on it, it can slowly build levels in with its liver and whatnot, something eats that, it dies, and so on and so forth. So it can actually last in the environment for several years. We're not sure what the impact of that is, but that is concerning, given the volume of brodifacoum that is used out in the region. And that is why the EPA are looking closely at regulating it. If they do regulate it, it'll likely need a licence. Most farmers will probably not go down the pathway of bothering getting a licence, so it will remove one of the only tools they have in managing possums. So it is a risk to our program as it currently.
How does a licence stop?
I guess their thoughts are a licence trains them in best practice use. So when people go and fill their bait station, they go again to refill it instead of tipping the bait on the ground or scattering it wherever. they should actually be containing it and sending it to landfill and whatnot. It's those sorts of risks are concerned about, and it has turned up in wildlife such as deer and whatnot. So there's large restrictions right now on where you can actually undertake harvest of deer and sell that around Broda-Whakaum.
Any effect on birds?
Not that I know of.
Low.
Just on other ruminants?
Well, other animals, rats.
Carnivores, all the ones we want to get rid of.
Yeah, all the ones you want to get rid of.
But even harrier hawks, most of the harriers we see will have Broda-Whakaum in their system because they're scavenging possums.
Fair enough. Carnivores.
And I do believe they are starting to pick it up in aquatic environments, so there is concern there.
Oh, big deal.
Councillor Fenbeck.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I don't see that really clear in your slides or your report. We will have pockets where landowners are doing a really good job, correct?
Okay.
So I'm not a real fan of subsidies, but those who, I would say from the attitude is towards actually doing their own work on their own farm, and they want to control possums. So by removing subsidies, you make it harder for those who actually are able and capable and have the time and see it as a responsibility for themselves. In your report, you don't really give an indication that actually farm owners actually have the ability to actually take that responsibility to themselves. By taking subsidies away, you're actually telling them, look, get out of the space, we'll do it for you. Although we need as many to be able to assist us in actually getting rid of possums. So I think we should look at how we can still continue to support them in the work, the good work that they do in actually keeping their farms clean, or try to keep them clean. And often you find they actually are bombarded by the pressure from around them, and you monitor them, and they actually find it very tough. We've got some really good farms in the TB control area that have done an excellent job, but they just cannot keep on top of it, and it overruns them. But I think we need to look at continue to support them. That will be my point.
And I think that would be part of the proposal that Ian would bring back about what's the effective and efficient ways to support landowners.
Yeah.
Is it a subsidy, or is it more technical advice? What is it?
Yeah. Don't forget. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Foley.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the report. I appreciate there's a lot more detail to come, but just around the financials, just a little bit of concern. So the contract is $7 to $8. Is that all inclusive? That's just their time and bait, and then there's still all the monitoring and everything to go on top?
Well, the monitoring regime would be very different, and the monitoring regime would be really different. So at the moment, what you're really monitoring is landowner compliance. Possum numbers is just the measure. Whereas with contractors, you would be monitoring their performance in delivering low possum numbers. So you would set a threshold, it would be 3% RPTC or 2% or something, and you would monitor to see whether they had delivered that across that whole area.
Okay, but I'm just trying to compare what we've got now to what you're proposing. So if I look at my targeted rate, round numbers $2, contractor rate $1, subsidised bait $1. I assume the subsidies coming out of those rates, so $4 a hectare, and so you're saying contract is $7 to $8, and then I assume all this extra monitoring and everything on top. So I just feel like just the first look at this, the landowners doing the job properly are looking at quite a jump up in cost for this program, and is that just because of the landowners that haven't been pulling their weight, or?
Yeah, so these are, and look, that was always the risk of, we felt we needed to put some numbers in there just so you knew that we were thinking about that, but I'm personally pretty dubious about any numbers that we're able to put in front of you at the moment, because what the estimate that Kevin hasn't given you, and he acknowledged it, is the opportunity cost for the landowner. So it doesn't build in the landowner time, right, and nor does it build in the...
Sorry, I've used the contract cost here, so...
Sure, but you're comparing the $4 a hectare with the $8 a hectare under a contract model, and there is quite a difference. But what the $4 a hectare doesn't consider is the opportunity cost for the landowner. So the time they spent doing possum management is time they could be running their business, which is a farm.
Sorry, and the contractor cost is employing a contractor to come in and do that. So there's no time lost to the landowner.
But there is under the model where that we've tried to account for their cost. That's just their direct cost. It's not their time component that's factored into that. So it's not an equitable comparison because the contractor's paying for their time and materials. The landowner dollar doesn't account for their time. So it's not apples with apples. And the cost benefit analysis that will bring you can start to drill into that, as well as the call them opportunity costs, call them intangible benefits that come from this model or a contractor model around outcomes council's trying to achieve. The biodiversity outcomes, they're not factored in economically anywhere in any of this, but they could well be in terms of putting a value on the biodiversity gains you'd get from a widespread, sophisticated program that is delivering low possum numbers.
Sorry, the only thing I'll add into that is if we stick with the current model, our monitoring costs are going to go up because we're going to have to monitor a huge area. Whereas if we go to contract models, that monitoring comes right down. We repurpose that money to go towards paying for contractors. The second part, $7 to $8 a hectare, that's talking a large area doing annual control. If it's a large area, 100,000 hectares, you might only need to break it down into a third this year, a third year 2, a third year 3. So the costs start breaking down again because your property's only being done once every third year, but it's done at scale that possums don't have the ability to bounce back. So there probably will be an increase in cost, but we don't know what that looks like until we go through the process of costing that up, repurposing the funding we already have alongside what that delivery model is going to look like. But if you just took a $7 to $8 hectare and you think that's going to be the increase, yes, I can see your concern, but I don't believe that's going to be the case.
And so, look, absolutely, those are factors we'd want to bring back to you so you fully understand what it means if there was going to be a change. Because I hear you in terms of, the real impact is going to be on the rate line and a rates demand for a landowner. And so what you need to be able to see is what is that relative to what any other model, including the status quo, might be providing. So there's the absolute dollar comparison, but I'm going to be encouraging to think about the, factoring in the outcomes that can be achieved with a different model. Particularly if we get to a point where we agree that our possum management, the primary objective is biodiversity outcome, and we're focused on achieving biodiversity outcomes. Well, you could easily put a dollar value on that, and that may well skew it to a contractor model pretty quickly.
Okay, thank you, Ian. That's some robust discussion there. Councillor Barker.
I'd like to move the recommendation.
I'll second it. I reckon 2, is that recommendation 2?
Yeah.
So you are recommending 1 and 2?
Yeah.
1 and 2. Okay, would you like to speak?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I wondered whether I could indulge the mover to add a 2.2 to his recommendations.
Well, we have 2.1.
Well, let's hear what
Yes.
2.2 is.
What is 2.2?
I'm proposing that we add an instruction to staff to the effect that to develop a robust monitoring and performance system to accompany the proposal.
I thought that was implicit in the resolution. That's what was being saying, that that all that's being asked of us here is to have an in-principle view about this. They'll go away, spend time and money and resource, and come back with a robust proposal for us to see. And at that point, we have an analysis of it.
Yeah.
I don't think it adds anything to it.
Can you confirm that, Ian?
So yes, part of the model we would bring back to you would be the monitoring program we would have and the costs associated with that, because they all have to be factored into the.
Well, I'm
the
hearing
final
you, but
package.
the
I'm
recommendation
prepared
doesn't say
to
that.
change by then.
Why don't you just add that word in as a
Can I-
comma
excuse
after?
me?
Sorry, Rick.
No,
yeah,
we'll just stick
Probably
with the mover.
Instruct
you.
staff to develop a proposal, it includes analysis of costs, benefits. What was the other thing we wanted?
Robust performance monitoring.
And performance monitoring. Analysis of costs, benefits, performance monitoring, and funding models for a contractor-based model.
I approve of that as a seconder.
Yep. Could we have that on the screen, please, Annalie, so everyone's aware of what that new motion is?
I don't think it's necessary, but let's make the belts and braces, glued, screwed, strapped down, shrink wrapped.
You happy with it?
Consensus.
That's great. Float on the concourse.
Shall I just time's ticking on, yeah. Can I just say, I really support this. Look, this is no surprise to anybody here. This council's known for a long time that its funding for possum control is less than about half of what our neighbours do and other councils. And no one's been able to explain properly how we have as good a job done as they do for twice the money. The simple fact is, we don't. It wasn't that long ago we had a massive outbreak of TB in the region, and the anguish was palpable. Possums were the problem. It's costing a lot of money, and we are on the point of failure again. There's no question we have to have a rock-solid program to deal with possums. We're going to hear later from Osprey, which I welcome. There was last year or 18 months ago, we learned that the communication between Osprey and HBRC had broken down, wasn't working as well, and it was a commitment by the staff to rebuild that and make sure that's what. I want to test that as well. The fact is, whether we like it or not, we have two funding models. You know, Osprey has funding for a source that we don't have. We have funding for a different source. We just have to make this work. And I also support this because in developing this plan, we will, in my view, despite the scepticism of Mr. Maxwell, I think if we have a solid platform of contractors that we contract with and have direction and control on, we could, if we so chose, add to that by pouring more resources in to get them to do other things for us. I've no doubt about that. If they're going into the bush to go and put down bait stations and so on for possums, we could also ask them for an extra cost on top of, without diminishing in any way, shape or form, our focus on possums, things to go and do with mustelids and other things. We would then have a toolkit that we could really attack predators in this region who are tearing our biodiversity apart. This just makes sense in every level. But we need to go and do the work. Conceptually, this makes sense to me in every level. But we need to go and do the work to make sure the machine and all the numbers stack up. And to pick up the points that Will has made, to make sure, give him confidence about that, and also the points that Sheriff have made. But we have to do the work. I think this is years overdue.
Thank you.
Well done.
Councillor Graham.
Thank you, Chair. I also very strongly support option 2, moving to a contractor model, for various reasons. Everyone around here knows that I'm a strong supporter of farmers being responsible for biodiversity and all, and especially around water on their land. But in this case, possums were introduced into New Zealand in 1837, because I looked it up. That farmers didn't introduce it, some bloody idiot did it to get possum fur. And presumably, if there was a government around then, that was sanctioned by the New Zealand government. So despite some of the comments around the table, this is a community responsibility. We just can't land this on the farmers. We introduced this pest as a community, and we've got to now solve the issues around it as a community. Admittedly, they'll pay a bit. Landowner responsibility. I have a small block, and I caught 26 possums since February. But you do wane, you do get out and you've got to prune the roses, and Mike, he's got to do the sheep and the docking and all the things he's got to do. And it does go on the back foot. There's no doubt about it. It goes on the back foot. And this plan here, it's not because they don't want to do it, they just lose enthusiasm and it becomes a low priority. That's just what happens. That's just human nature. So this model, these will be professionals out there doing it, and so that'll be really good. Lifestylers, well, I noticed it was in the paper. There's no doubt about it. Possums get sanctuary in lifestylers' properties. 26 possums since February on my property, so on 10 acres. So they've got to be included, and it's forestry. It's incredible that we haven't included forestry in the past. All those trees, you can guarantee they're full of possums. So, this has to be a program right across the board. It has to be some landowner responsibility, sure, but everybody in our community has got to contribute to this because we caused it together.
Good.
Thank you.
Good stuff.
Councillor
Thank you,
Curtin.
thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm in a little bit disbelief that I'm hearing the same arguments that were put up in 2001 and 2021, that somehow the landowner, the person's business is at stake, is entitled to put their, without any due analysis, to put their hand in the ratepayer's pocket to pay for this. And let's be clear on this, that the ratepayer has invested up to about 17 million, and we did drop the ball in monitoring and observing what was going on over that time to protect that ratepayer investment. Let's just go to the issues here. I'm very much in favour of proceeding to consider this intervention, but I want to see the intervention logic. Why are we doing this? We've passed, or the responsibility for vector control is passed to Osprey. Therefore, why aren't we asking the hard questions of Osprey as to why aren't you doing it? So the thing that I'd like to see come out, and that's why I was hopeful to ensure that we've got the right approach here, is to say, should this council be engaging in vector control? Or, alternatively, is our role to monitor and ensure compliance around that? So one of the things that needs to come through when we look at the model is to say, look, this is best in the hands of Osprey. They're the ones that gather in the revenue that's meant to do it. Why are we, this council, doing it? What's our intervention logic for doing this? We could equally ask, for example, if I fall off the wagon in terms of drenching my sheep, should I ask the council to help me out there? Or if I forget to spray my black spot, should I put my hand in the ratepayer's pocket to help me out to spray my crop? So it's those sorts of fundamental questions that need to be asked. The disturbing thing that I see in this is around our response to monitoring biodiversity. I didn't know we had a less than perfect, probably non-existent biodiversity monitoring regime in play. So that was a real revelation to me. How on earth do we go to the public and say that we want some money from you to protect biodiversity when we haven't got a blasted clue about what that looks like? I mean, have we done it? The evidence, and I'll talk to Mr. Collins offline, is recently from Waikato coming through to say the invasion rate or reinvasion rate from cleared areas is far more rapid than we ever thought. So the follow-up and monitoring is critical to any investment we make. So we have done the ratepayer a disservice by not ensuring that we did monitor and that we did protect their investment over those 2 decades since we instituted this program. And I think that's a substantial failing by this council. The other aspect of it is should we be involved in this? What is our role? And that's, I hope, hopefully out of that sort of review and report, we come back with those answers rather than the carte blanche. Let's do this because it's good for the environment. We don't know that. Is it economically sound? We don't know that. We're dealing with, we need to have the analysis of the economic benefits. We're dealing with people that have cattle and people that have deer. We can see, in fact, that dairy farms are relatively clear. So who are the beneficiaries here? What does that look like? I'm happy to support them. I have cattle myself. I very much like to be supported in that. But what is our logic? Why are we doing this? And should it be us? Should it be someone else?
Thank you. Any other speakers? Right of reply? Nothing. Okay. So it's on the table to support recommendations 1 and 2 with the amendment of performance monitoring as part of the analysis. All those who agree say aye.
Sorry, you were going to put it up there.
Sorry, she can't. Would you like me to read it?
Or can you read it?
Yes, I'll definitely read it.
That amendment?
So the motion reads, instructs staff to develop a proposal under Section 70 of the Biosecurity Act 1993 that includes an analysis of the cost, benefits, performance monitoring and funding models for a contractor-based model, option 1, for possum management in Hawke's Bay for consideration and potential adoption for public consultation. All those who agree say aye.
All right.
Those against? Carried. Thank you. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. It's pleasing to hear that someone who's as committed to this subject as you has weakness and cannot maintain it ongoing. There's a problem.
Comes up and I just don't
Well done, committee members. We got there.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, so we have a guest waiting for us. On item 7, we have Dan from Osprey.
Dan.
So if we can leave our questions to the end, Dan, is that fine?
If perhaps I'll just introduce.
Oh,
Yeah, that makes sense.
great. And I'll hand it over to Ian to introduce the item. And we are running a little bit late, so please be considerate of your questioning/comments.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, look, Dan Schmidt, who's on the screen on Zoom. Welcome, Dan, to the council. Dan's the General Manager Service Delivery for the North Island, and perhaps Dan can talk a little bit more about his role.
Hold on just a minute. Members, we're on the next item. Can you please? Thank you, Ian.
Dan can perhaps talk a little bit more about his role and where he fits in the Osprey architecture. Look, this paper, there's been a nice segue out of the previous paper into the work of Osprey. You had the Chief Executive of Osprey talk to you 12 to 18 months ago, virtually during COVID, with one of his staff. So the paper does two things. One is it provides an opportunity for you to meet Dan, to hear from him about Osprey's work as it relates to TB management in the region, given that we have a large TB outbreak in the region. But it also provides an opportunity for us to, reinforce and highlight to you the developing relationship with Osprey, acknowledging that a year, 18 months ago, it wasn't as effective as it needed to be. Mark and I have put a lot of effort in recent times into shifting that, as have Osprey. So we've been working very, very closely together on building the relationship, and you'll see in the paper that council staff are now connected into a range of fora with Osprey that we haven't previously been before. And so, although we haven't formalised it, I'm describing this now as more of a partnership with Osprey than a relationship. We're starting to build to a partnership because we absolutely understand the value of our respective programs and the need to collaborate, share information, which we haven't done well previously, and figure out where we can combine our efforts to achieve our common objectives. So I'm personally very comfortable about where we've managed to move to in a short space of time through the leadership of people like Dan at Osprey, and get us much more in the tent and have them much more visible in terms of our work and have us more visible in terms of their work. So look, I'll pass over now to Dan. Dan may also, I've shared with him the paper that you just read or just debated and discussed previously. Dan may wish to make comment on that as well. But I'll pass over to Dan and he can talk more about his role and the work of Osprey in the region at the moment.
Thanks, Ian. Much appreciated. And apologies for having this to be a virtual session. I really did want to be there in person, but I just couldn't connect, couldn't get it done. Just a family emergency in the end. So my name's Dan Schmidt. I am the General Manager Service Delivery for the North Island for Osprey and have been in place since about November last year. Come about as a result of a restructure which was implemented within Osprey last year, and Steve probably talked about that when he was talking to yourselves. The real reason for that was wanting to be much closer and connected with our stakeholders and regional partners. We recognise that actually, as Ian has said, the relationship between councils, not just this one, but other councils as well, needed some work. And so that's why my role is here. My role is responsible for the delivery of the TB-free program. in the North Island and the NATE extension program as well. So, we have within the TB program a number of goals that we're working towards. We're wanting to have 0 infected herds by 2026, have TB eradicated from possums by 2040, and have TB eradicated from New Zealand by 2055. So, we've got some challenging goals ahead of us. It was only in 2016 that this program got changed into an eradication program. Particularly for Hawke's Bay, we currently have 17 herds infected, and that's up 1 from last week. So we are still seeing farms coming infected at the moment through Hawke's Bay. We have 10 that are currently under investigation and 7 that are sitting with 1 clear test. What that means is 7 that we can expect that maybe half of those will go clear within the next 6 months as the next round of TB testing comes on. But the way that I would describe the situation at the moment is that we're in a holding pattern. We are, and I'll talk about it in a bit, we are needing to get on and treat the source areas that are, where we know infection is. And so in the interim, we are investing a significant amount of money into the buffering that is going on around those source areas through the whole Hawke's Bay. Through the infected farms that we currently have, we have a number of issues that we're working through with these farms. I'm sure you'll be well aware that there's some difficult situations out there, and particularly with the weather patterns that we have through Hawke's Bay and the dry and coming into winter and things. It's been challenging for some farms, and particularly where we've seen reinfection of some of these farms as well. So we've been working quite closely as well with Rural Support Trust, Dairy NZ, Beef and Lamb, our shareholders, Deer NZ, and other key local stakeholders to sort of put support around these farms, including MPI, animal welfare, and the community. The community engagement arm of MPI as well. We really have appreciated the support of Mark and Ian through this. It's it's been. I just want to acknowledge the difficulties that are there around communicating some of the messages that we have, some of the negotiations that we have around our pest control are particularly sensitive, and trying to work with council and others to communicate those to our farmers and farming community and wider rural community. It's just crucial. We couldn't do it without them. So we are focused on clearing these herds as we can, but at the moment, like I say, we have some key pest control operations that need to be undertaken. I'll move on to the next slide, please. So the current infected herds, this is a map of the current infected herds that we have. We have 16 beef herds, no dairy, and 1 deer. They are tracking, from effectively from the Waipanga block. We see a sort of down ravines and valleys, and then there's some sort of there's a few farms that have become infected around the Esk Forest and Waikowell, Glengarry areas. So we are focused on particularly some of the aerial operations that are being planned and worked through for both Waipanga and the Waikowell, the East Forestry aerials and things as well. So these are key operations for us over the next few months that we need to undertake, but these are the sort of big ticket items that will need to actually clear this TB outbreak. Onto the next slide, if I can, please. I just want to talk a little bit about the land access issues, that we've touched on. Land access across the whole of New Zealand has been an issue that has been potentially a bit. We've needed some improvement from Osprey's point of view. We have developed up a strategy for ensuring that we have access to land when as part of our pest management plan. No longer can we plan to do operations where there's easy access to do. We have to go into both the more challenging areas as well as the people that are happy to have us undertaking pest management on their land. So right from Steve and the board, CE and the board of Osprey, there is a commitment to make sure that we are focused on pest control where we need to for the eradication of TB, and so that's where this strategy has come in, and that requires a range of tools that come into this. It's like any sort of working with stakeholders and groups, looking at ways that we can proactively and cooperatively work with groups to achieve a shared goal, achieve biodiversity aims, but equally looking at the way that we work under the Biosecurity Act and looking at the ways that we need to make sure that we are able to enforce access if need be. The Waipanga block itself, this is a critical operation for us, and it's got a huge amount of focus for us at the moment, as you would understand. There was an injunction hearing that we supported the trust through in December last year. The decision was made on the 24th of December last year that dismissed the injunction. So it really meant that the responsible trustee and the trust was able to grant access to Osprey, that decision had been properly made. Since then, we have been continuing to work with the trust because there have been other conditions on access, and so we're still in negotiations with the trust, and at quite a sensitive time with the trust as well. So we're building a better relationship. I'm confident that we will get access, but it is a challenging area, and it will be more challenging as we move to other areas within the North Island, where people's connection to livestock agriculture is less. And actually we have to think about other ways to engage with these groups, these people that have important goals and outcomes for their own land, and we need to work out how do we achieve what we need through this as well. So pest control operations through the Hawke's Bay. Since 2019, we've invested $13 million worth of work into the Hawke's Bay. It's approximately an annual budget of about $6 million a year, 6.5. We are, this is a significant chunk of the North Island's pest control budget. We have about $12 to $13 million annually for the North Island pest control budget. So there is a large chunk which is going into the Hawke's Bay in response to the TB outbreak. So we've done around about 160,000 hectares of control work since 2019. And we've also had 270,000 animals tested through the Hawke's Bay since 2019, and 60 have TB. So while this is a large outbreak within the context of the number of TB herds we have around the country, we also have to put this in perspective that it is still under control, and we are finding, that we are capturing these TB herds. But we are in this holding pattern until we manage to achieve control in these key blocks. But the buffering area and the contingency planning that is going around these buffers is significant as well. So we have a number of plans that if we don't achieve access, in a timely fashion, we will be looking at other buffer controls, stepping up our buffer controls and making sure that we are protecting herds and farmers as best we can. So this slide is a picture of the control work that was undertaken in 2019-20 financial year. And then if you click on, there's 2020-21. This map was done maybe a month ago, so some of these have further been completed. The green is completed. The orange was in progress, and the pink is still planned or in progress operations. Some of the pink are significant aerial operations that we the best window for us is often in winter to achieve these as well. And the next slide is the planned work for the 21-22 financial year. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Thank you. So it's still quite extensive control work through the Hawke's Bay 21-22. And like I said, there are other plans depending on whether we achieve access to different blocks and whether we, how we might need to adapt and evolve our approach as well. So in terms of our engagement with council, it's been quite a step change, and I'd like to again acknowledge Mark and Ian for driving a lot of this. When I came on board, they were quite useful to point me in the right direction about what needed to happen, and so through that we have invited them onto a Hawke's Bay industry TB support group to support our infected farmers and really get timely updates around what's happening in the region from our point of view, to make sure we're well connected there. It's with a range of other local stakeholders and is a good forum to both have not only robust discussion about what's going on, but also for us to get feedback on actually what other groups and council and other stakeholders are saying. We have invited Ian onto our Hawke's Bay governance group meeting with other key Osprey stakeholders and our shareholders, and this is a group which is important to us. They help to drive the direction of our response activities, and they're senior leaders within the shareholders that are owners of Osprey, and so it's a key group which drive our activities for Hawke's Bay. The Hawke's Bay TB Free Committee is a farmer-led committee which again helps us through a range of activities, supporting us through community messaging, again, giving feedback and helping us to support the farmers which are going through some of these challenging times. And very much a part of the council are very much a part of that, and assistance with key messages to community there through the whole piece. The aspects that I would as I'm coming through my first year and working through the planning cycle for us, the budget cycle and things, we are just beginning to look out to the next planning cycle starting for the next financial year. And what I would be looking at is that we make sure that we are well connected for our planning cycles, to make sure that where we are where we're investing money, we're linked with council to make sure that the left hand knows what the right hand's doing. It's been a positive relationship to build in other parts of the North Island as well, but we have traditionally it's been a bit of a challenging space. But we all have common goals here, and I think there's a lot to be gained from linking up through this through our planning cycles and budgetary cycles to make sure that we're well aware of which areas are focused to us, and then which areas are we identifying which are vector free as well. So for us, we have our focus on treating the source areas, making sure that we get in there and treat where we need to. But while we are doing that, we are maintaining the buffer control as best we can. Some of these source areas are difficult. Difficult negotiations, and so it's about working through what is the most appropriate timeframes to be working this through. How do we support each other and the farmers while we undertake this? We're ensuring the strong linkages and communication channels with council. And look, like Ian mentioned before, there is. I just want to touch on the importance of some of the changes which are being suggested by Ian and council staff. Particularly the inclusion of forestry further into the Possum Control Area program. We have approximately 50% of our farmers that are infected. Talk to us and are very clear with us that when there is harvesting happening through forestry, the impact on of possums onto neighbouring properties is significant, and the risks that they see are significant. So very much support the inclusion of forestry and that landscape control. Any reservoirs that are left just aid, if the buffer control if it fails, if we don't, if it's not able to, control and contain TB, which is a biological organism and it happens, then we, the risk of spread is much greater. So we are seeing infected farms and reactors around forestry, and the Esk forest is an example of that, where we have 3 infected farms surrounding and a number of reactors there as well. Look, that was where I wanted to leave it and leave some time for questions. Relatively short, but I hope that was useful. So thanks for your time.
Thank you, Dan. Members, do we have any questions for Dan? Councillor Barker.
Firstly, thank you, Dan. I like it seemed to me that you've got a born identity image projector here on screen. Although this is deliberate. But, anyway, the first one is, one of the things we discussed some time ago is about interconnectivity between regions. And I remember this discussion that Hawke's Bay might have done well, but to our north, Gisborne might not have. And it seems from your maps that the possums are moving down from the north, invasion coming across the border. So what are you doing as Osprey to manage interregional possum control management?
So yes, this is part of a wider North Island plan, and there is control going north, east, west across the whole central North Island and out towards Gisborne. I was talking to our planner last night to make sure that we have sufficient control work there. We have it's over a number of years that we're undertaking different aerial operations, and some of the iwi groups up there. We need to make sure that we are actually actively building relationships through there as well, because there is a risk that we do need to undertake more further control through there at some stage. As I said before, it's a biological organism, and as much as we would like to say that that every time that we're 100% confident that we will get it every time, we just can't. So there is a significant amount of investment going across the whole North Island landscape, and this is part of it.
Well, I thank you for the answer, but it's still not clear to me that we've got an integrated approach here. So could you follow up with a paper outlining what Osprey is doing to make sure its work on the edges of Hawke's Bay is coordinated to give us an effective program here? I just don't get that from your answer.
I can certainly follow up with Ian and council staff.
Thank you. The second thing is that some time ago, when the outbreak of TB and farms came up, the issue was raised that there was a disconnect between Osprey and HBRC. And at that time, I recall very clearly moving a motion to ask for a joint report to be presented to council between Osprey and HBRC on possum management. Is this presentation today that report? If not, when can I expect to see the report? And I asked us to be clear about this. This is done because I want, as a council, for us to have visibility of the relationship and how status it has between Osprey and HBRC. We did not have that before, and in my view, we still do not have that.
So, Councillor, perhaps I'll respond to that. So, in happy to work with you offline to understand what a report might look like. What we have tried to present here in the paper is an explanation of our various responsibilities and roles and where we're working together collaboratively, the forums that exist. And Dan shared with you the work they're doing, and we've obviously talked to you in the previous paper about the work we're doing. So I probably just need to get clarity from you about what's missing, and then we can certainly bring back to you further information about that, and whether it's a report or I had imagined a council paper such as this would suffice, but clearly it's not.
Oh, yeah? I think a joint report normally has 2 letterheads on the top of it and sets out what both are doing and sets it clear that we can see that the things are integrated. We've got 2 separate reports here, and we would be able to say that you are on this and doing that, and as a consequence these things are, so we can see that this is working. These 2 separate reports don't show me that particularly.
Perhaps we can map that out.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to work with you on that.
And for it to be an annual report, so we've got annual commitments.
Councillor Foley.
Kia ora, Dan, thanks for that report. I just wanted to talk or ask of you around your slide on the land access and the challenges you spoke of there. I guess, the frustrating thing is if we get there in the end is just the time that it's taking. But my question is, there's talk in Wellington of the control of dockland changing hands. Have you had time to discuss with, amongst Osprey yet? Does that raise any concerns around, many more of these challenges if that was to go ahead?
Yeah, that's another aspect of the land access challenges that we are facing. The working with iwi in a range of fashions, whether it's through public conservation lands or managed, DOC managed lands, and the consultation that goes with that, it's an evolving space at the moment, and we are working very closely with DOC to understand what that process looks like. We met with them a couple of weeks ago, and we have another meeting with them on Friday. It certainly has presented us with some challenges, and one of our operations to the north of Waipanga was due to go ahead in February. That was held because of some difficulties around consultation, effective consultation needing to be undertaken. So it's an evolving space. We are working through the process with DOC quite closely, and we are following the process which has been outlined with them. I'm confident that we'll still be able to undertake these operations, but we need to work with both DOC and with local iwi as well, because the consultation requirements are also quite onerous on some of the iwi groups that we're engaged with as well, and whether they actually have sufficient resource to undertake all of the consultation requirements that are required is a big question that needs to be worked through.
Councillor Foss?
Thank you. Can you just clarify, I think you said 12 to 13 million's been spent through the North Island via yourselves. Was that number correct? Was that a per annum number this year?
Yes, so that's per annum. We have about 14.2 million in this year's budget. It's approximately 13 million per annum.
Thanks.
For us.
And you're funded via levies and via
Yes.
the Crown, via various agencies. Is that right? So roughly what proportion of your funding is from the taxpayer?
Around about 30% comes from MPI.
Around a third. Great, thank you. And then another point, on your slide about timings, you had the amount of herds infected, being currently under watch, tested, etc. Can you just remind us, I think you need 2 clear tests, is it over 6 months and a day to be clear? So whatever
Yes.
happens, if everything goes brilliantly well from here on out, we're at least 6 months and a day, presumably
Yes.
the test tomorrow.
It's a good point. Getting these source operations done won't be an immediate sort of clearance of the herds through Hawke's Bay. It'll still take potentially up to a year or 2 years to clear some of these.
Thanks. So to extend that and what you said earlier, with you guesstimate about 50% of those 7 herds will probably fail their clear test currently. I know much is out of your control, but do you have any idea or thoughts as to how long until we see this out of control, this response no longer required? Because we are talking years here, I think.
Yeah.
Aren't we?
Yes, I would agree. I mean, the reality is that we're in a holding pattern until we get the control over the source areas. It's not going to be a quick fix. So it could. My thoughts are that we'll still be here with a number of, a significant number of farms, potentially 10, 8, 10, maybe next year. But it's a guessing game. This is a biological organism as well.
Sure, but if I think from your numbers, if we've turned the kind of curve a wee bit and 50% will fail the next clear, we're probably 2 years or 3 years away, potentially. Yep. And I know that's a guessing game. I'm just trying to put it in context. I think you were online when we had our previous report. We've had our Section 17A response to our own Possum Control Area management, and we just had a report earlier today. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. Have you got any comments as to some of the some of the things you've become aware of in regard of what we've had responsibility for regarding possums, and the veracity, I guess, of the way this is broken out in this particular hotspot. Or are they mutually exclusive or linked?
There's definitely linkages there. Not having been here for a significant amount of time, it's a wee bit difficult to comment properly. But the comments that I would make is that, particularly where we've had vector-free areas, where we've been controlling areas, buffer areas, when those buffers have failed, if those areas have not been controlled well, the spread of TB has been much faster than what we would have otherwise anticipated, and so it's some of the spread has taken the spread speed has taken some of our vets by surprise in the Hawke's Bay.
Okay, and now you've got things are on a much better footing. So well done, and thanks to your organisation and our team. Thanks very much. So under current settings and the knowledge we have, maybe it's a question for Ian or James, actually, what responsibility do we have, if any, other than a communication back and forth for the area under the TB control? Is it entirely Osprey and we have a knowing, watching brief and we're very interested? Anything more than that?
Yeah, so that's exactly it. So in practice there's a bright line, or by law there's a bright line. If it's under TB management, it's Osprey's gig. They're responsible and they resource and drive and plan and run the operations. The point is that in practice it's not really a bright line, because ultimately that's going to come back to us at some point in time, several years' time. So we need to understand what's happened, how it's happened, and what the transition back to us is going to look like, as well as, Dan had it on one of his slides, we hold relationships with people in the catchment that Osprey don't, because we're here and consistent all the time. So we've got a role to play in supporting them in the communication and the leadership to make their programs effective. So it is very linked, but in law quite distinct.
So, Chair, can I just make the additional observation that one of the things that I think Kevin could have quite easily, and I'm sure he would agree, with respect to the previous item in his presentation, is that one of the additional risks of the current model is this interdependency we've got with Osprey and the Bright Line, and the fact the biology means that if we don't have a program that has a lower level of risk and greater assurance associated with it, then the consequences of things not necessarily going perfectly for Osprey are even greater. So that, I think, is a double reason why we need to go here. I just want to also make the observation, having had some engagement with Osprey on this case, that underscores the challenge we have with the status quo, and that is that one of the properties in question, a number of the properties in question actually here that are harbouring, are incredibly difficult for management. So the notion that a landowner, who's a farmer, has as part of their business, and it should be an expectation, just as drenching the sheep or whatever, would take care of the possum risk. In one case here, at the heart of this, we're talking about 14,000 hectares of previously cut over bush that you can't even walk through, that is multiple owned, and the topography is incredibly challenging. And so, a lot of the country there's high risk for harbouring vectors here against our farmland has huge practical challenges for the landowners to do self-management, and for us to step into that space. And I think it's worth noting $6 million being spent on this program alone by Osprey. Our total spend as a regional council is $2.7 million for all animal pests across the whole region. So if we step into the space comprehensively, and you've seen some of the numbers on the previous item, it is a major step change in investment. And then finally, to the point around monitoring, biodiversity monitoring, Kevin tells me the only regional council that is doing this across their region is Greater Wellington. Their spend on biodiversity is currently 5 million, ours is 950,000, and their land area is less than half of ours. So just to give you a sense of, if we want assurance that we're dealing with the possum problem, we're monitoring the biodiversity to understand the cost benefit of all this, we're talking about millions and millions and millions of dollars of additional investment.
Thanks. And Chair, just one final question. Just very interested in things that we can do to help or assist everyone get through, regardless of the label. But just clarification, because the topography of the area is obviously very challenging up there. Understand that. There was a court finding about 6 months ago which clarified access was available. The trustees were confirmed or something. So Osprey could go in and do their management and mitigation. About 6 months ago, I kept hearing kind of a hesitancy. So I guess, has any trapping or management been done on the land you were trying to get access to by the court 6 months ago in the interim time?
Not since then. So the court decision was an injunction. So there was access granted to Osprey around about 18 months ago. An injunction was placed against that decision by one of the beneficial owners. We supported the trust to defend that decision, and that decision was upheld. So the decision of the trustee to give us access for possum control was upheld. However, following that decision, there were further conditions that were imposed on our access. So we still essentially haven't been granted access since then by the trust, and so we're still working through it.
So you haven't been able to access. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And the last question from Councillor Lambert.
Dan, the question about access is that because of the methods you use? Is that specifically about 1080 aerial drops, or do you have a strategy to try and combat future access problems like that?
It's an interesting question. When I've met with the trust, I feel like there's a lack of trust between Osprey and the trust, and it's potentially been a factor in some of the years previous as well, where Osprey have had a different approach to dealing with some of these. So because there's a whole lot of questions about the reliability of our data and our information and the way that we've approached things. So we are building that much smarter now and trying to build a much closer relationship to be able to support some of the information that we need to work with them on. But it is the question about 1080 is a valid one, and no, there's some very big concerns within the trust about 1080, but we do see a lot of support for the pest control and for the TB program generally. It's just about the how, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Dan, and would like to thank you for your collaborative working relationship being reignited with the Hawke's Bay Regional Council. So in that, I'd like to move the recommendations, and we have a seconder, Councillor Rick Barker. The recommendation that this committee receives and notes the Osprey update to the Hawke's Bay TV response in this report. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Thank you very much. It is cup of tea time. Thank you, staff, for being patient. We are a bit late, but grab a cup of tea and we're back in 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
No debate.
20 minutes on
No.
the sheet here.
No, we've gone over time.
Cut it down by half already.
I love your democratic approach there.
6 more a year.